the controversial conflict fought by the United States in order to quell communism in Vietnam. This long and bloody ordeal claimed over 2 million lives over the course of 19 years. But while we argue over the intent and ethics of the war itself, we have completely ignored the bravery, resilience, and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought in it. This is especially true of the United States unit known as MACV-SOG. In the 1990s, the United States government released the astounding and formerly unseen documentation of SOG. On January 24, 1964, MACV, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, created the Studies and Observations Group, or SOG. Because they operated in countries where the U.S. military wasn't supposed to be, they worked completely under the radar, even to the point that, in the event of capture, the government wouldn't claim them. Due to their secrecy, the astounding actions of these men are practically unknown. I didn't even know about SOG until I stumbled upon the book SOG, The Secret Wars of America's Commandos in Vietnam, by John L. Plaster, the source for all the facts and stories you're about to hear. Their obscurity is simply a travesty, so today I'll be showing you why we should recognize these unsung heroes in 3 points. Firstly, service, and how they perform for their country and their brothers. Secondly, sacrifice, the brutality they were subjected to and the sacrifices they made. And lastly, selflessness, and how their selfless actions have saved thousands of lives over the course of 53 years. Again, my 3 points will be service, sacrifice, and selflessness. So, firstly, we'll be discussing SOG's distinguished service. SOG started out with simple hit-and-run naval raids along the coast of North Vietnam, but SOG really came into its own when it started running its recon teams, or RTs. Comprised of 3 Americans and 6 to 9 trained indigenous tribesmen, these teams would scout the jungles of North Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, finding North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong outposts along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the artery of enemy supplies. The intelligence they gathered led to the destruction, via aircraft, of hundreds of enemy camps and innumerable thousands of tons of supplies and equipment. And the havoc they directly wreaked on enemy troops and encampments devastated morale and forced the NVA and VC to increase security along the trail, preventing those troops from entering combat. In 1970, every recon man in the field tied down 600 troops from entering South Vietnam. Another vital function of SOG was the Bright Lights program. Was the Bright Lights program. When a pilot went down or a body needed to be recovered, a SOG team would be sent in. Now, these missions were extremely dangerous, and failure was not uncommon. However, they did manage to save many men from enduring unimaginable suffering as prisoners of war. SOG had a significant impact on the war, whilst remaining almost completely unknown, even to military officials. The small amount of information that did make it into the hands of the media was very flawed and easily dismissible. For example, Project Eldest Son, the practice of inserting sabotaged ammunition into enemy supply caches, was reported by Time magazine as the illegal work of rogues. But what was truly heartbreaking was that not even their families knew the truth of their feats and perils. SOG men performed their duties with the utmost honor and efficiency. Secondly, I want to talk about the valiant sacrifices made by the men of SOG. On May 4th, 1968, RT Alabama's mission to wiretap NVA communication lines in the Ah Chau Valley had gone terribly wrong. They had been in a constant firefight for around 12 hours. With the second-in-command wounded and his radio man dead, both Americans, and 1 known tribesman also dead, team leader Staff Sergeant John Allen was in a tight spot. After nights spent pinned down in a bomb crater on a hillside, dawn brought an all-out assault by the NVA. As enemy infantry closed in on the crater, Allen and the 5 remaining moons stood up in the withering fire and gunned down the approaching troops. When Allen returned to cover, everyone was dead, except for 1 gnome in the second-in-command, Kenneth Prime. After hours of more airstrikes and lost aircraft, a Jolly Green helicopter came in and dropped a line. But due to the altitude, it could only lift out 2 men. Allen protested, but soon gave up, strapped in, crying in the gnome, resigning himself to die. Before his men left him, Allen shouted, "See you in Phu Bai," to Kenneth. As the helicopter lifted away, the enemy fire suddenly resumed, coming in torrents. Allen's men began to convulse violently as liquid began falling. As he screamed in rage and anguish, the sprinkling of blood splashing on Allen's upturned face turned into a downpour. The NVA had sadistically waited for the defenseless men to come into view before firing, completely ignoring the helicopter. Using clever strategy, Allen managed to escape, becoming the only survivor of his team. Many other men died horrible deaths to save their comrades. The Bible says in John that there is no greater love than laying down one's life for one's friends. Too many SOG men showed that love, men whose ultimate sacrifice was covered over by the bias against all veterans of that war. This fact alone is one of the greatest tragedies of the Vietnam War. Lastly, we will be discussing how the selflessness of SOG operators affects lives to this day. Sacrifices like that of RT Alabama were all too commonplace. In 1968, SOG had a 100% casualty rate, meaning that every recon man was wounded at least once and about half died. But SOG men performed their duties to the fullest, despite knowing that they wouldn't receive public recognition for what they'd done. But the most selfless act was that they threw themselves willingly into combat, using unproven methods, paving the way for future special forces. On June 4th, 1971, the evacuation of Outpost Hickory, a radio relay and NSA surveillance site, began. At 4:30, a Huey helicopter came in to make a pickup, bearing a horrifying message for the commander, Staff Sergeant John Caviani. "This is the last ship. Get on it." But the helicopter could only lift out 7 people, and there were 32 men left on the ground. Caviani refused to abandon his men and stayed behind with the 19 Montagnard tribesmen, 4 South Vietnamese Army soldiers, and the slightly wounded security assistant, Sergeant John Jones. They had no air support because 2 weeks earlier, an arrogant officer demanded that his helicopters be returned from SOG. General Abrams ordered him to provide support anyway, but the officer found ways of circumventing the order. The result of this bureaucratic chest beating was that every man that was abandoned at Outpost Hickory was either killed in action or executed, except for Caviani, who stumbled and crawled, badly burnt and wounded for 10 days, only to be captured on the outskirts of Firebase Fuller and spend the next 2 years being tortured as a prisoner of war. As a result of this, the 160th Aviation Regiment was created to ensure that special forces today are guaranteed to lift out if they need one. SOG men gave themselves willingly to the mission, one they fully understood they would receive no recognition for and would most likely kill them. But their courage has not gone unrewarded, because they have saved so many lives and saved so many families from unimaginable heartbreak. When I leave this room today, what I hope to have imparted on you is why these forgotten men the forgotten men of SOG should be remembered. This relatively small contingent of Green Berets, SEALs, and Force Recon men had a significant impact on, proved to be one of the most effective fighting forces of the Vietnam War, and even in the entire history of the United States military. They directly saved thousands of lives by destroying hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies and equipment and preventing tens of thousands of troops from entering combat. Their selfless willingness to test unproven strategies made them safer for generations to come, saving an untold number of lives to this day. Joseph Campbell once said, "A hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself." The fallen men of SOG meet this requirement by miles, defending the cause of democracy. But more than that, they made the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of their brothers, that they may go home, that they can see their families again. There is no greater cause than that. Not to recognize what these men died accomplishing disrespects their memory, a memory which has already suffered the shame of obscurity. These unsung heroes, lost to the hatred of the war they fought in, must be remembered.